Hey everyone, it's Movie Lover 120 here, and today I'm actually going to be doing a franchise ranking. I'm finally going to get to one I haven't done, like, hardly. The only time I ever did a franchise ranking was Harry Potter in video form, where I talked to the camera about how I'd rank the films. This time, I'm going to be finally doing another franchise, and that is for none other than the Die Hard films. All five of them, from best to worst. So, if you're wondering how I'm going to rank this series, well, let's start off with my favorite film of the Die Hard series, starting with this collection of the first four movies, and that is for none other than Die Hard, the first film. Now, this was a film that introduced a new line of action films beginning in the 80s, around the time the 80s were ending, and it basically absolutely nailed it and brought in so many new ways for the action films. There would be like Die Hard on a plane, Die Hard on a bus, where the protagonist was basically trapped in this whole situation in one location. And it would become a big name for a lot of action films to come for that whole era in the 90s. What is so great about this film, and while it still holds up today, is Bruce Willis gives this very great performance as one of my all-time favorite cinematic heroes, John McClane, as well as the directors, and especially the very late actor Alan Rickman, rest in peace, to the film's villain Hans Gruber, one of my very favorite, all-time favorite villains in cinema, right next to villains like Darth Vader, the Dark Knight Joker, and Thanos. And this was actually Alan Rickman's first film. It's perfect. And aside from lead characters like John and Hans, they even have some great supporting casts too, like Joe Tagachi, the president of the company that's in complete danger that John McClane has to save, who's a caring, encouraging boss. There's also his wife, Holly McClane, played by Bonnie Bedelia, who is, well, John's ex-wife, and took the position just to protect the hostages when her boss gets shot by Hans. And there's Holly's secretary, Jenny, who's played by Dustin Taylor, and of course, this love-to-hate character, Harry Ellis, who's this sleazy businessman. And of course, there's also so many cool action scenes like that, finding the construction site of the building. And even plenty of heartwarming moments like with John trying to protect his family. Of course, the amazing score from Michael Kamen. And of course, one of the greatest lines ever, and that is, "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker." Pardon my language. And for an R-rated action film, and it even has so many Christmas themes that makes it look like a Christmas film. And as a joke, every year, there's people that would call it a Christmas film, even though it's been reassured that it's not really about Christmas, so it's not really a Christmas film, it's just set during Christmas. And yeah, this is actually one of my all-time favorite action films of ever, and one of my favorite Christmas films. So yeah, I'll call it a Christmas film, and I'm going to give it a flat-out 10 out of 10. Still a fun watch to this day. Everything. If you haven't seen it, I would definitely recommend it. It's one of the best action films ever made. But then, of course, since it proved to be such a huge hit, we ended up getting a second one, and that was none other than Die Hard 2, or as they call it, Die Harder. Now, this one was about John McClane getting mixed up in yet another terrorist plot, and this time, instead of a building, it was at an airport, where he was waiting to pick up his wife. And also, this time, a treacherous ex-colonel, is now seizing control of the airport and is ready to crash every inbound flight unless Esperanza is freed. Now, sure, it wasn't as good as the first one, but I thought it was still a decent sequel. Like, Bruce Willis was still phenomenal as John McClane. It was not a bad follow-up from the first film. The action scenes were still great. There was, of course, some decent acting. And Willie Saunders' performance, well, it wasn't really as good of a performance as Alan Rickman. And William Stewart was not really a good villain like Hans Gruber, but he was still decent for what he was given. And a great concept like having a film with an airport getting attacked by South American terrorists as well. And there's even some better explosion effects, bigger and more greater than the original, decent pacing. And once again, it's once again set during Christmas, so there's plenty of Christmas themes to still make it look like a Christmas film like the first one. Well, maybe. Also, especially one of my all-time favorite explosions, where John opens the fuel hatch and burns the fuel with a cigarette and heading to Boeing 747 and blows the plane up near the end of the film. It's very epic, and it's a very phenomenal explosion. And there's still an awesome soundtrack, like with the first film. Even though some of the music in this film was kind of recycled from it. Now, everything, well, but either way, it's not a bad sequel, so I'm going to give it, respectfully, a 7.5 out of 10. It's not as fun as the first one, or as fun as the third or fourth one I'm about to get to, but it's still decent watch nonetheless, and I would definitely rather watch it over the pitiful fifth movie that I'm about to get to as well. But eventually, 5 years later, we got the third film, and at this time, it was not set during Christmas, and it was set during more of the summertime, and that film was none other than Die Hard with a Vengeance. This is actually my second favorite film in the Die Hard series, and it's my favorite of the all-time favorite of the Die Hard sequels. What basically happens in this one is it's set 5 years after Die Hard 2, and Detective McClane is pretty much now all divorced, jobless, and an alcoholic, and was basically fired for his reckless behavior and bad attitude, but he ends up getting called back into action when this terrorist who is Hans Gruber's brother, Simon Gruber, played by Jeremy Irons, takes all of New York City hostage with this lethal game, and now John McClane has to team up with this electrician named Zeus Carver, who's played by the legendary Samuel Jackson, and now McClane has to dash to the city and stuff, so what I absolutely love about this one and why it's my second favorite movie in the Die Hard series is because Bruce Willis gave still a great performance as John McClane, and even Samuel L. Jackson was actually perfect as Zeus Carver, and is probably my favorite of all the Die Hard sidekicks. And lots of great action, still lots of great action scenes like driving the taxi car and the subway train. And it's also a much better sequel than Die Hard 2, and plus, we get the return of the original director, John McTiernan. And also, Jeremy Irons was a perfect portrayal of Simon Gruber, especially considering that a year before he would voice Scar in The Lion King, and once again, the Yippee-ki-yay mother effer line is still phenomenal like it was in the first two. And Zeus Carver is very funny and likable, and was easily the best part of the film, and probably the best character in the film too. And the idea of the film trying to this time save New York City from destruction was very, very well executed. In the first film, it was a building. In the second film, it was in an airport. And acting is still amazing, like in the first two. Amazing visual effects, especially for the explosions and even the water. And especially one of my all-time favorite battles, and that's the final battle with the helicopter, and a very good ending scene. Now, some people thought it was a bit of a step down from the first two films, but for me, this is easily the best of the sequels, and definitely much better than Die Hard 2, really, because it didn't really feel rehashed, and maybe there was a little bit of a racist scene where McClane wears the I hate sign, which was kind of a bit racist, but enough about that. So, what would be my ranking for Die Hard with Vengeance? Well, I would respectfully rank it a 9 out of 10. It's better than Die Hard 2, my favorite of the Die Hard sequels, and one of my favorite third installments of all time. And I wouldn't mind this being the end to Die Hard, but for me, there was eventually what we thought was the end to Die Hard until 12 years later, we ended up getting a fourth movie, believe it or not, and that was none other than Live Free or Die Hard. Now, some fans may not like it, but me personally, I think it's still kind of a good film. Now, only because it depends on what version you watch. Now, technically, the PG-13 stuff wasn't all Len Wiseman's fault. That was all 20th Century Fox going, oh no, we can't make an action movie rated R. Make it PG-13 so we can get more money. Like, people, this film doesn't deserve to be PG-13. Neither does this franchise. It's clear visioned what kind of audience it's made for, and it doesn't matter what it's rated. But oh well. Thankfully, we get the unrated version of this film, and I prefer the unrated version of the Live Free Die Hard. The PG-13 cut I could care less about, but what this one was about, it was Washington is now preparing to celebrate Independence Day, and now John McClane has to carry out another routine assignment, and that's bringing in this computer hacker who's played by Justin Long for questioning. And now there's also a tech-savvy villain named Thomas Gabriel, who's played by Timmy Olyphant, launching an online attack for America's computer infrastructure. As chaos is from, McClane now has to use old-fashioned methods to fight the high-tech threats. Now, I would personally find this my third favorite film in the Die Hard series, and is it as good as Die Hard with Vengeance? Well, no, but it's fine enough how it is. It was basically, even though Thomas Gabriel is actually a decent villain, where he uses T-Minus for computer hackers to shut down the infrastructure system, and actually almost came close as one of the very first villains to come close to actually killing John McClane, his daughter, and Matt Farrell. He was the strongest villain in the Die Hard franchise. Also, Bruce Willis and Justin Long actually had pretty good chemistry, and honestly, Matt Farrell felt way more like a son to John McClane, even if, I may sound weird for saying it, but he felt way more like a son to McClane than his son Jack in the fifth film. And especially the Star Wars references were good. And I also really love the scene with Kevin Smith as cameoing as the character Frederick Warlock, where, even though unfortunately it was where he ended up being Bruce Willis, and then they ended up working on that film Cop Out, and we all know how it ended up, but enough about that. There's still some very great action thriller scenes, like McClane stealing that semi-truck near the film. It's a very cool reference to Raiders of the Lost Ark, everything. And the acting is very new and improved, especially for beloved fan favorite character McClane, and also Mary Elizabeth Winstead wasn't bad as his daughter Lucy McClane either. Honestly, and I'm gonna flat out say it, Live Free or Die Hard was the true end to the Die Hard franchise, not the pitiful Good Day to Die Hard movie. Ugh, I don't want to get me started on that. I'm about to get to that in a bit. But honestly, now, here's how I'd rank both the versions. And also, I loved the Yippee-Ki-Yay line in this, is where John McClane has this bullet wound on his shoulder, the villain holds him gunpoint right there, but he epically takes it out by shooting himself in the shoulder, which also shoots and kills Thomas Gabriel, and actually epically uses the Yippee-Ki-Yay line in the unrated version. In the PG-13 version, it's basically just Mother F, and yeah, but how would I rank this? Well, I would rank the PG-13 cut a 7 out of 10, but the unrated cut, I would rank an 8.5 out of 10. I prefer the unrated cut over the PG-13 one, and if you do watch the fourth one, I would definitely watch the unrated cut if you still want the R-rated stuff. But then, 7 years afterwards, we get what is easily the most atrocious Die Hard movie of all time, and that was none other than A Good Day to Die Hard. Honestly, this movie did not have any reason to even be made. It was directed by the guy who directed that pitiful Max Payne adaptation. And what basically this film was about is McClane now having to go to Moscow to track down his estranged son Jack, who was played by Jai Courtney. And McClane thinks his son is a criminal, so it now is Suddenly, Gotcha learns that Jack is actually working undercover to protect Komarov, this Russian government whistleblower. With, now with their own lives all the time, they have to overcome their differences in order to get Komarov to safety and thwart a potentially disastrous crime in the Chernobyl region. Well, now, why this film has so many problems, it's just flat out unwatchable, is that the fourth film, Live Free or Die Hard, was already a good ending to the franchise. It did not need to be expanded any further, or either. It even missed the spirit of the franchise. Like, they flat out ruined John McClane for me. Like, when he was that anti-hero who actually cared about people in the previous four films, which made him so likable and stuff, this time he gets turned into this unlikable hero. Basically, he has no care for innocent bystanders, and don't you dare get me started on that scene where he steals a pedestrian's car and drives over the people. Don't you dare get me started on that. And especially, Jai Courtney's performance was flat out horrible as a son. And very lazy dubbing work. One line from the movie was literally ripped off from the fourth film with the exact same audio, and a very unbelievably weak story. And also, Gotcha, the person they're actually trying to protect is really the villain. Yeah, that's really not a surprise. Like, we already, even though we were literally focusing on Victor Chudrin and his Lucky Alik as the true main villains, we decided out of nowhere that the ones they were protecting were the villains of the whole film. Plus, the villain dies exactly the same way Hans Gruber died in the first film, which was falling out of a building, with the exact same facial expression and soundtrack. Plus, his daughter's deaths even achieved rehash of his brother Simon Gruber's death from the third film, which was a helicopter crash. And it has another lazy bad Russians versus good Americans plot and everything. Plus, also, some really poor CGI. Like the scene where John and Jack were driving through the building and there's fire everywhere. You can tell that's literally all CGI and they didn't even put effort into it. Also, I need to stop saying also. This one ends with a free finish ending, even though all other four films literally end with a pullback ending. But instead, and plus, there's the infamous director's cut. The fifth one at least has Lucy McClane in it, but instead, the director's cut literally removes her and even removes all mentions of her, even though the bits between her and John were at least the only good moments that actually have some of the spirit from the previous movies. What else can I think of why this film is so bad? I hardly have one positive thing to say about it, but even Bruce Willis has even confirmed that he hates this movie, and for good reason too. Maybe if there are some good things I could try to think of, is that maybe the action scenes are somewhat good, or some of the fight scenes as well, but other than that, this is a flat-out horrible film. Very unwatchable, very forgettable, and basically killed the Die Hard franchise and caused it to end on a stinker note. And I'm going to give this a very bad 3.5 out of 10. It's unwatchable. It's something it's the one I never like to rewatch or even like to revisit. And it doesn't even feel like it's R-rated too. Remember when they complained about the fourth film being PG-13? And this time they decided to listen. They were actually listening to fans and making us see this one R-rated. This one barely even feels R-rated. Other than a few headshots, it's not even that R-rated of a film. So, how would I rank this franchise? So, now that I talked about all the films, I'm going to rank the films now. For best to worst, number one best would be Die Hard 1. Second place, Die Hard with a Vengeance. Third place, Live Free or Die Hard, the unrated version. Fourth place, Die Hard 2, Die Harder. Fifth place, Live Free or Die Hard, the PG-13 version. And bottom worst, of course, is Good Day to Die Hard. So, that'll be it for this video, guys. If you're watching, my franchise ranking, and I'll come up with another franchise ranking soon. But until then, thank you all for watching, and if you like this and want some more, then don't forget to like and subscribe to Movie Lover 120.